Big mistake. My husband found my panties at his friend's place. Now I'm destroyed. I would never forget the day my life went downhill within a blink of an eye. I thought I was having fun and exploring what I had not done before. All I wanted was to experience and venture into new things that my husband was not offering. You know, sometimes it's really bad to get married when your heart still wants to explore other things. It's like getting married when you are not even ready for commitment. I made a huge mistake and now I'm caught in such a fucked up situation I don't know what to do anymore. I just want advice, but if you're mean, I understand I made a huge mistake. This is a long story. Me, female 23, and my husband, male 26, have been married for around 3 months, but we've been together ever since my sophomore year of high school, his senior year. We've done everything together. When he went to college, we made sure that I would go to the same school. He even turned down a better scholarship to go to a school that I had a better chance of getting into, since he was one of the smart kids, and I was one of the more average kids. And when he finished, he immediately started working so that he could support us. And I dropped out because he knew I hated school. He works as a software engineer right now, leaving company unnamed, obviously. Sorry for the long background, but I just wanted to show that I do love him with everything in my being and everything he's done for me, and I wouldn't give him up for anything. As time passed, I went out with him. We were still in college at that time, and he was still razzing on me. He was a very smart man and business-minded, but what I had noticed about him was that he didn't take any ** tea from anyone, and find out later that he was actually a Capricorn. He was smart, business-minded, funny, and kind, but he had a very low temper, and he was very strict. He always wanted perfection. I had thought they were playing when they say, never fool a Capricorn, because their revenge is always wrath and cruel. I learned that the hard way. One thing that I can advise people on is that if you are dating a Capricorn while you are a Gemini, just prepare that your relationship will always have very serious ups and downs, because a Gemini has their own short temper, and Capricorn also. But the Capricorn always wants to have an upper hand. They lead, so as the Gemini, you will have to understand that and thread carefully. Because once you do them wrong, you would have poured gas or paraffin on an already blazing devil's fire. Ask me, I know how it's like to date and even get married to a Capricorn while you are a Gemini. So I'm talking from experience. Anyway, Dominic, my husband, was really romantic and loving. He knew how to treat a woman like a queen. So we continued going out. He showered me with so much love and gifts. The way I was falling harder and harder for him every day, I eventually found myself like I was possessive over him, or obsessed, I don't know. I would get angry if he was not answering my calls, or he would come to have one of his meetings in a cafe with a woman. Was I being obsessive or possessive over the poor guy? Time passed and he had confessed his feelings for me, but I kept turning him down and preferred having only a friendship relationship because I had thought I was not the type of girl he would want to be with. 2. I was afraid of telling him about my job as a stripper and sex worker to get money. I just couldn't tell him what I was doing for a living except for the fact that I was working at a cafe, which he knew since we first met there. I was ashamed of my second job, and on the other hand, I had fallen for the guy, but I was doubting myself. I stay at home and take care of the typical cleaning and cooking and house maintenance, so we have a good relationship and we both put in a lot of work to make sure things stay afloat. Before I get into this, I should say that my physical attraction to him wasn't the same as when we were in college. Ever since he started working, he started to work out less and doesn't come to the gym with me as often. He's not fat or anything, but it's obvious he doesn't have as much muscle, and the things he had early in college, like his six-pack, which he knows I used to love, are long gone. Maybe less working out reduced his testosterone also, because the sex isn't as frequent, and when we have it, it's not like it used to be. Starting a couple of months ago, one of his better friends that I will call Tom, male 25, started coming over to hang out. Usually I don't like his friends in our place so frequently, but me and Tom instantly clicked. Tom and I hit it off, and my husband was so happy to see that I finally got along with his friends. But then, as usual, he ended up going back to work and spending less and less time with me, which honestly might have been one of the reasons I cheated. When we were about to get married, he promised me we wouldn't fall out of touch like in the movies and that he wouldn't abandon me for work. But that's exactly what I feel like happened. Tom started swinging a couple of hours before my husband got home to wait for him comfortably, so we started hanging out. We did everything together that I felt like my husband should have taken the time to do with me. We binged Netflix, talked about so much, went out to movies. Whenever people saw us, they said I looked happier. And at that point, I think you was. Tom started swinging by to hang out with me more than my husband, so he came earlier and earlier, and soon it was just at the beginning of the day, as long as he didn't have class. He's working on his master's. My husband was very boring and always busy with work to a point that he didn't even try to make time for me. As his wife, it would always be either his work or gone to business trips that take months for him to come back. So I am young and still beautiful, so I thought, why not try what I had been missing out ever since I got married? Well, my work history is not too good, so some might know what I mean when I say some old habits die hard. One morning when he came by and we started to binge Netflix, I didn't have as much clothes on as usual because he came at like 9, which was slightly earlier than expected. But I was already so comfortable with him, it didn't matter. I only had a big shirt on and some underwear, and I didn't even realize until it was too late that I wasn't wearing a bra, so I felt awkward. Then Tom, as a joke, took off his clothes and only had a shirt and his boxers and climbed into bed next to me saying it was undies time. And he was abnormally close, but I ended up moving in even closer. He put his hand on my thigh and I ended up moving to sit in between his legs, and before I even thought about it, he turned me around and he started grinding an erection onto me and I kissed him. I didn't intend for it to go further than that, but he was everything that my husband wasn't anymore. He was still built, and I could tell he really wanted me more than my own husband had, so we ended up having sex. I trusted him, of course, so we never used protection throughout that day, and he gave me the opportunity to feel ways and do things I hadn't done in so long. I thought I would feel bad right after, but I didn't. I was only really excited that I was desired and wanted and satisfied again. Me and Tom continued this relationship for months, and I ended up giving him the nickname Hubby because I really felt like he was my true husband the way he treated me. But of course, he started to get possessive like men do, and this is where the huge problems began. Whenever we had sex, he wanted my wedding ring off, and I ended up losing it, and my husband immediately noticed because I made a point of never having it off. But that was only the first thing. Tom told me to stop kissing my husband or really treating him like he was my husband at all. And I did it, and I treated my husband like shit because he manipulated me into believing he was a shitty husband in person for leaving me so alone. I went back on birth control and we never used protection because he didn't like it. And I never objected because I just enjoyed the feeling of being taken again. So one day I received a call from Tom, one of my husband's friends, the one who loved sex. I was surprised because he hadn't called me ever since the day we last saw each other. He asked me to meet him at his house, which was not far from my matrimonial home, for a quick one, of which I bluntly refused and reminded him that I was no longer into that life and I was happily married. I said that to get him off my back and hoped that maybe he would get the message even though I was not really happy. It had been quite some time since things had been tense in my matrimonial house. My husband was acting fishy, like there was something he was hiding from me. At first I had thought it was work pressure, but things got worse. He was suddenly moody. His sex drive was no longer the same. As much as he acted like he didn't love our daughter, yes, we had a child, a daughter to be precise, or even tried to play with her, but that was a small thing compared to how he was acting towards me alone. So Tom just laughed at me when I told him that I was happily married, and he told me that if I was happily married, I would have acted like a happy person when they had come to my husband, Dominic's celebratory bride. I first didn't understand what he was trying to imply, but I somehow remembered that he was the only client that knew me at my happiest, or when I was pretending to be happy. He told me to know my worth, and if the battle that I was trying to win with Dominic was worth it, and how long would I keep fighting for something and someone who couldn't even steal a glance at me when they were in my house. What he was saying was true, but I couldn't give him that satisfaction just because my husband had changed on me. I still had faith that he would be back to be the person he was when we first started dating. My marketing company on the other side was doing well. It was the best destruction I had. Time passed, I decided to start going out to live a little, I had never got time to all that and enjoy my money because I had to think of the situation that I was facing at home. So I started by going to the mall to do some shopping, hoping that it would cheer me up just like all the girls who say shopping was a great therapy. But for me, it wasn't. I won't lie. My husband knew that I was the lover of affection and intimacy, but the way he was acting made me somehow feel frustrated and in so much desire for intimacy. Though I didn't want to do that to my husband because it was going to jeopardize my marriage, I couldn't hold myself anymore to the point that I would sometimes help myself. So when I went shopping, I bought a lot of lingerie, hoping that they would bring at least a small spark to my husband's eyes when he sees me wearing a sexy number. So when I got home, I prepared his favorite dish. Luckily, I had gotten my daughter a nanny because of work, and I was kind of tired of burdening my mother with my problems. My husband came back earlier than expected that day. The nanny and my daughter were at my mother's house, so I tried acting like a good wife and welcomed my husband with a kiss and asked him to go take a quick shower because we needed to talk. Luckily, he complied and did as instructed, while I was left to finish up everything. I made sure to wear something sexy that would make him want to eat me in an instant. When he came back from taking a shower, he came down the stairs and asked what the occasion was and where I was going since I was wearing a dress that he had not seen before. I told him that I had wanted to spend quality time with him and tried addressing the issue that we were facing in our marriage. But the guy just dismissed my concerns and changed the topic. I asked him to at least notice me as his wife. I then tried seducing him, but he was not having it. He complained about being tired, and what surprised me that day was that he asked where Chrissy, our daughter, was. I knew he didn't ask that because he wanted to ask, but it was because he wanted to dismiss what I was trying to do and address it with him. So I told him that our daughter was at my mother's house. He just took the car keys and told me that a child shouldn't be separated from their mother because that would break the connection and the bond we had, so he was going to fetch her. I didn't really understand the sudden love he had for our daughter, but somehow my heart was happy and at ease to see him considering our daughter's feelings. I had hopes that maybe we would get through everything, but who was I fooling? He left me there with the lingerie on. He didn't even try to at least compliment or show me some affection. He just remembered that he had a daughter that he had been absent with for a year. My heart was broken and I was so thirsty and hungry for some intimacy, so I found myself calling Tom with the hope that he was available. Luckily, he had invited me to their private party because I had told him that I was bored and I needed some company. I didn't even waste any time. I just changed only the dress that I was wearing, then went to the location that Tom had sent. I didn't care if my husband would come back home and not find me. All I was thinking about was the salt and desire for affection that I had been craving for. When I got there, Tom welcomed me and introduced me as his fun girl, which came as a huge shock to me because I didn't remember forming any fun relationship with Tom. But I dismissed that, but maybe we did have a fun relationship which happened a long time ago. So the night went on, and at that party I noticed a few of Dominic's friends. Someone suggested that we all play spin the bottle, where one would either kiss the person the bottle would be pointed to, or you would have a shot of vodka. That game was fun and all. I had kissed 3 of Dominic's friends, including Tom. As the game was getting heated, someone changed it and told us to play truth or dare. I tried containing myself by choosing truths, but Tom asked if I was truly happy and sexually satisfied in my marriage. That question caught me by surprise because I didn't know how to answer, and I couldn't lie because they would see that I was lying. I was getting uncomfortable, so I changed the answer I had given them and chose dare. Tom then dared me to go to one of the rooms in the house with a guy called Kenny for 15 minutes. He looked like he had been craving for me the whole night. I was resistant at first because I didn't know what I was supposed to do in that room, but I eventually went with the guy. When we got there, the guy started touching me. Mind you, I was also tipsy, so the alcohol was playing its role on my body, so it reacted to his touch and smooth words he kept saying. Within a blink of an eye, I found myself going down with the guy. My mind had flushed down any thoughts of my marriage problems and my husband. I was enjoying the moment. My mind took me back to where and who I was before getting married and having a whole family. Not knowing that the room we were in actually had cameras, I was so caught up in a moment to a point that I didn't notice anything, plus the alcohol was doing its work. The game went on until late, and the real fun started when everyone was dancing. I was really sloshed to the point that I found myself dancing like a stripper on top of the table. I did the dance for 3 of the guys who included Tom, Kenny, and the one that used to come to the strip club for my dance. I was letting loose and cared less. Little did I know that they were actually my husband's friends. Well, I knew the 2, but I didn't know about Kenny. So as I was busy dancing, I told the guys to follow me to the private room. My stripping habits had come back on full mode, and we were all drunk, so I commanded them to follow me to the room, and they complied. When we got there, we started our little party. I danced for them and seduced them to a point that Tom and Kenny started touching me, and boom, we were having a threesome. I was enjoying the way that they were touching me and making me feel good. I don't remember where the other guy had gone, and I didn't care, so I continued with the fun I was having with 2 of these guys. We did a lot the previous night. We were all sloshed to a point that I couldn't remember everything that had taken place in the private room, though I remembered bits of what had happened. I woke up in the morning with a very serious hangover headache. When I looked at myself, I saw that I was not wearing anything. My heart started beating, thinking of the worst and thinking of how stupid I was for putting my marriage in jeopardy. I had committed adultery, something I had vowed to myself to never do again. I was so scared, thoughts were racing in my head. I couldn't help but feel guilty of what I had done, and there was no undoing it. As I was busy panicking, Tom came into the room with a cup of coffee and painkillers to kill the hangover headache. As much as I wanted to appreciate his kind gesture, my heart and my mind didn't allow me to. It was on its own dimension and a very dark one. I just couldn't stay there anymore, so I only took the painkillers and drank them before rushing home. On the other hand, Tom was acting very possessive over me. He was acting like a jealous and obsessed lover. The following morning, he was super angry at me, telling me that I had acted like a body seller in front of his friends, and the fact that I allowed alcohol to rule me. He said a lot of things that made me think that maybe Tom had thought that what we were doing or what we had was serious and was going somewhere, while I knew very well that I loved my husband to death. But his ignorant demeanor had led me to do what I did with Tom. That time I had decided to go to Tom's house. Well, more like he decided. I was so submissive when it came to him. I really don't know what was happening to me because I was not a submissive person, but Tom managed to make me a submissive person. Do you guys think I was falling in love with Tom's? I mean, the way things were happening between us and the way I was acting around him? One would swear that when I looked at Tom, I was looking at my favorite toy or candy. Though Tom was a bit controlling because he had wanted me to stop doing some things with my husband, claiming to me like I was a parcel. He had a lot of terms and conditions, but I was enjoying every moment of it. When I got home, I found my husband busy with his work. He was doing a very good job, and I was really proud of his accomplishments. I greeted him, and he told me that Chrissy was sleeping, in a very cold tone. I knew I was in deep shastrisk tea because I didn't even notify him about my sudden departure. It was something that came to mind at the last minute. I tried apologizing to him for leaving the house and not telling him where I was going. Instead of saying that maybe it's okay, he just gave me an answer. He was as cold as ice. Weeks later, I had been living in fear and thought that my husband was seeing through me what I had done. I felt like the abomination that I had done was written all over me, and it didn't help with the guilt I was feeling. During those weeks, my husband suddenly decided that he was moving out of the house when I asked him why he was doing that. He told me that it was for the best, not only for him but for myself also. I didn't understand his lame and lousy excuse, so I fought with him about moving. After the whole begging and throwing tantrums that I did thinking he would change his mind, the guy continued with his plans and moved out of the house. As much as I was fighting for my husband to stay because I didn't want our daughter to grow up in a dysfunctional household with two unloving parents, I had some hope that my husband would change and notice me again just like how he used to. But I guess I was wrong. Tom was the only person who kept me sane throughout the whole thing that I was going through in my house. It was really hard for me, so I started going to Tom's house a lot, to spend a day with him. I really enjoyed how Tom would be possessive over my body. The way he was exploring all of my being made me somehow develop something for him. I knew the risks of being in an affair with Tom would somehow put me in very hot waters, but I couldn't help it. I was enjoying the attention that I was getting, and it was really amazing to see someone getting jealous over you, seeing you like you are the apple of his eye. Tom made me feel like a woman again. But the only problem with him was that he was thinking that was my husband, or he would replace or take my husband's place in my heart. He would tell me to stop kissing my husband and doing other things to or with my husband. Stupid me, I obeyed the nonsense that he was saying. I don't know if his big tool had taken my mind, but I don't know why I was so submissive to Tom. I stopped kissing my husband. I put as much distance between us in bed as possible, and I made a point to never have sex with him no matter what. I called him fat and ugly when I got angry or was upset, and it just sent my marriage into ruins. Tom was still around, and I guess my husband realized how lovey-dovey I was with Tom because he started making accusations. And of course, Tom got possessive again. So when my husband told him he couldn't come over anymore, he sent my husband months' worth of the pictures and videos and messages we had made and sent each other as some kind of sick payback. When my husband got home, he was infuriated and he screamed and threw things, and I had no idea what to do. And I realized that Tom didn't really care about me as much as my husband did if he was willing to expose me like that. He started yelling about how hard he was working as if I didn't help around the house, and he broke a lot of my personal items. He was crying in the corner and talking about how he wanted to murder himself, and I was so scared because he randomly kept lashing out again. He kept asking me questions, half yelling, half crying about how often and how long it had been going on, and I broke down and started crying too, and told him everything. I knew there and then that my marriage was hanging on a very high and dangerous cliff. You know when you get that feeling that tells you that everything you had worked hard for was about to go south instead of north side? That was what I had felt, and I couldn't even blame anyone for it. About a week after he had moved out, a delivery guy had come to the house stating that he had come to deliver the parcel when I asked who had sent it. He told me what all other delivery guys usually say, "I don't know, man, I'm just a delivery guy." My conscience told me that maybe it was something from my business clients. Little did I know that it was actually divorce papers and another paper that stated that Dominic was taking full custody of Chrissy. He looked at the videos on his phone getting angry again because I told Tom I loved him and that he was better than my husband and other things that insulted him. In the videos, he saw that we were having sex in our marital bed and that we never used a condom, and he always finished inside me, and I could see something in him just break, maybe because he was my first time back in high school, and I didn't let him do any of that until we were married. He kept scratching at his skin and harming himself in weird ways, and insulting himself like I would insult him when I got angry, and I was scared he was going insane. Thankfully, the neighbors called the police due to the yelling, although they took his side a little more than mine, and they asked me if I had somewhere else to stay, so I don't know if they hospitalized him or not. Now I live with my mother and am working part-time again. I regret everything, though I still haven't been able to quite distance myself from Tom, because I think he really started to care for me once my husband tossed me aside, and he's been here for me. Tom calls me wifey now, and it hurts because I really just want my husband back. We haven't gotten officially divorced, but he won't talk to me or return my messages or anything at all. If I send a third party there, he just tells them to tell me to get a lawyer because he wants to divorce me. I don't know if I'll do well in the divorce since he paid for everything, and because of Tom, he has a mountain of evidence of me cheating. I really just want this all to be done and over. As if what Tom did was not enough to ruin and destroy my marriage, my husband, or must I say my ex-husband came to my mother's house and asked to speak to me. You know, I had hoped that maybe he had come to talk and fix our marriage and put aside our differences for the sake of our daughter. But the man actually came to do a nasty delivery and a message on top. I didn't know how I was going to fight Dominic over that full custody matter because, I had nothing to prove my innocence since my abomination was out there. Dominic came to deliver my panties. I really don't know why he did that, but when he actually came with the cops, of which I didn't understand people. It wasn't like I was a dangerous person. He told me that he had found my panty in Tom's office, so he had thought that he should deliver it himself and not send people to do so. His excuse was lame, but I was embarrassed and kind of humiliated for getting such a delivery from my husband in front of the strangers who were cops. So to destroy the awkwardness that was building in my mother's house. I asked Dominic why he had come with cops to my mother's house, and guess what his response was? He told me that he had filed a restraining order against me and a letter of authority that forbids me from seeing my daughter. As if that wasn't enough, 2 days after Dominic had served me with a restraining order, other cops came to my mother's house. And that time my mother was the one who accepted the door. The cops asked if I was around, and my mother told them that I was inside. When they got inside, the other cop was just ugly and looked angry. They didn't even greet me. The ugly cop just cuffed me while telling me that I was arrested for attempted kidnapping of a child named Chrissy. I was shocked to find that my mind went in another zone and left me zoned out. My mind was running all over the place. I was trying to register what was happening and what those cops were telling me. How and why would I want to kidnap my own daughter? It was just hilarious and *T. My rights were read and I was taken to the cell just like that for the crime I didn't even commit. I got out after a week. A whole week I spent it in the most traumatizing and evil place. My mother fetched me from the station with no attorney to fight my battles. Now the tables have turned. Dominic came to my mother's house again, but he was going with the truck. As I was about to step out and ask what was going on, I saw my car being repossessed. Dominic came out and told me that I had no say towards the car because it was bought by him and it was under his name. That was how he took my one and only car. Not only did he stage an arrest on me and take my car, but he gave me a promise of destroying my life just like I had destroyed his heart. When he said that threat, he was not having any chill. He was so furious, even the veins were coming through his temple. I had seen Dominic angry, but the way he was angry that time made me scared and regret the things I had done. I know I should have been honest with him from the get-go, but I decided to keep everything to myself, and when the old me got unleashed, I couldn't control it, and forgot that I was no longer under the pressure of my family, and I was a married woman, but what did I do? I broke the vows that I had made in front of our families, friends, and God, and there was nothing I would have done to save my marriage. But now my life has turned to be the most threatened thing or most wanted thing on earth. To be honest, I don't even know what to do. I miss my daughter so much I might be speaking with her over the phone, but it's not the same. I miss holding her, playing with her, and sometimes going out with her, but Dominic had banned all that. He had banned me from being with my daughter, my only daughter. How fair is that? I once heard that he beat Tom to a pulp, not only beating but making sure that he dragged him with his car before dropping him to the hospital. I couldn't believe it, you know. It was just hard to believe that my loving and caring husband, Dominic, would actually do something so vile and evil. I had never thought that he had a psycho personality in him. Yes, my heart was broken and I was really sad when I heard about Tom's story, but it wasn't as heartbreaking as being told to be 100 meters away from your own daughter. If you had a beard in your womb for the full term of 9, then a person who only donated his sperm to me decided to act Jesus on my relationship with my daughter. As much as I loved and still love Dominic, but he ruined me and ruined my life. 6 weeks later, my mother told me to stop having a pity party because it will not bring back the things that I had lost, including my daughter, but instead it would take me straight to the morgue, and when that happens, I would not be able to fight nor see my daughter ever again. Those words made me think again about life, so I took the money that I had saved from my company and the one I had got when I got divorced and used it to fix myself. I know that it's not going to be easy with Dominic busy making sure that my life is a living hell, but I'm sure that I can overcome whatever storm that I'm facing. One thing I need advice on because I don't know what to do and where to start on my daughter's issue. I want my daughter back. What should I do about this? Hey Redditors, my name is Karen and this is my story. I am 24 years old and it's quite the strange one, but I hope you can learn from my experience as I have, and be careful not to make the same mistakes I did. This is how I lost a good, almost perfect man and got traumatized to a certain extent by it in the process. David was a good man, quite the gentleman, and nearly perfect if you ask me, and I had fallen head over heels with him. He loved and adored me and treated me quite well as our relationship progressed. We dated for around 3 years and then he proposed to me and I accepted in a heartbeat. It was pure bliss and our honeymoon was exquisite, but after the marriage and everything, something was missing, something that left a nasty hole down in my gut and made me feel like I was incomplete and very much unsatisfied. Of course, I tried to fix it, I really did. Even my husband was trying his best, but it just wasn't feeling right. I did not work out the way we both had planned, and we started to sort of drift apart from each other. No, we did not fight, we did not necessarily argue, but we did sort of give each other a certain kind of distance that was evident in our interactions and mannerisms. We would say our greetings in the morning, eat breakfast together, and get ready for work together. I would even give him a goodbye kiss on the cheek as we went our separate ways to our various offices, but that was just about it. The affection was just not as it used to be, so I was frustrated. I think we both were. We both started to stay out later after work. Since my husband could cook, it did not make much of a difference whether I was home for dinner or not, and he often cooked for the both of us too, like I would when he stayed out late. At that point, we weren't even trying for a child anymore because we both instinctively knew that having a child when the home was the way it was would be cruel to the baby, and we were definitely not monsters. Now you might be asking what it was that had been missing that had left me so unsatisfied. It was actually in the bedroom. I wasn't satisfied and I could tell they were David was not as well, and therein laid my mistake. The late night outings were something we had both gotten used to, literal excuses to not breach the subject of our rapidly diminishing affection, as both of us understood that we did not want to talk about the matter on ground. But I took it a step forward and began following some rather unsavory companions, in the form of women who enjoyed extramarital affairs and the likes. Soon I started to party like a college student on Friday nights in high-class pubs and bars. I looked fairly young, so I could actually pull off the college senior look, but I did try to keep my dressing on the tamer side, as in, I did not show much skin, wearing skimpy attire like the girls that were openly grinding on men on the dance floor under the strobe lights. I would come home half drunk and stumble up the stairs where my husband would welcome me with a frown but welcome me nonetheless, and actually hold me through the night murmuring things I would hardly catch before I pass out in bed till the next day. He would do almost the exact same thing the following week, and I would tend to him as well, reciprocating his actions, and I would hold him too. We were gradually looking more like affectionate roommates than like an actual married couple. It did not bother me or the both of us, I think, and I took it a step forward. I got myself a man on the side. It was an older gentleman that took interest in me one evening as I was about to leave the bar earlier than usual. The man, Anthony, had said that he watched me whenever I came in and just enjoyed the young adults gyrating on the dance floor while I sipped my alcohol. I had expressed displeasure at being watched so intensely, and I pointed out as such, which made the man sputter and apologize profusely, stating that he had not meant to come across as some sort of stalker. I rolled my eyes as I accepted the apology and we started to talk, mostly about anything, everything, and in some strange way, nothing in particular. We went on about topics and suddenly we would switch it up and talk about another thing entirely, until it was around 11 p.m. when I got tired and we left the bar. I could remember him asking to give me a lift, but I had declined, and he hailed me a taxi instead, held the door to the passenger seat open for me, and then bid me farewell as the taxi sped away. It should have ended like that, you know. I should have just let it be as it had been, but I didn't know when to stop, especially when I was meeting up with such a gentleman that rivaled my husband. I ended up meeting with him again and started to develop affection for the man. The next time I met Anthony, it was in the daytime, sometime during my lunch break, and he had been driving past when he saw me and parked so he could talk to me. It was a hot and tiring day, and it was barely over yet, so I couldn't just go home and hop in the shower. To say I was shocked and mildly annoyed would be a gross misunderstanding, but after he assured me that he hadn't been stalking me or anything of the sort, and I sort of relaxed. We got talking over the duration of my lunch break, and he was genuinely interested in getting to know me, but I only told him the basic stuff, and especially not about my marital status or any of the sort, which was easy to brush off since I was not wearing my wedding band, and he quickly dismissed the issue, opting to continue with getting to know each other. He bid me farewell a few minutes before my lunch break ended, surprising me, and we exchanged contacts. Anthony promised we would talk some more over texts and calls, and that he'd make sure I would get comfortable with him, to make up for having seemed like a stalker both of the times we'd met. I waved it off, opting to play disinterestedly, and I promised to pick up the phone whenever he called, and to reply whenever he texted. I actually made do on my promise to pick up his calls if I could, and Anthony was quite diligent, calling me in the evenings, an hour or two after I got off work, as I had told him my closing times, and the texts flowed in as well. From encouraging texts to simply greetings and texts asking how I've been and how my day has gone. He was quite the attentive man, and I liked that, so I continued to pick his calls and reply to his texts until he asked me to dinner months after we'd met, after around 2 months, and we began our affair. As you had probably already guessed where this was going, yes, you've got the right idea. I had an affair. I cheated on my lovely husband. The first night we spent together, that is, Anthony and I, was nothing magical. We went out on a date after we had pretty much been dancing around each other for 2 months, mostly with me playing hard to get and with Anthony doing his very best to woo me, and he finally did enough and got on my good side. I finally agreed to go out on a date with him, and he had ecstatically told me to leave everything to him, from the venue to our meal choice and final destination. I'd gone to meet him at the arranged venue, which turned out to be a high-end restaurant, you know, the ones with expensive dishes and complimentary drinks that left your taste buds tingling from perfection and blend, and desserts that made your taste buds sing. I had gone with a beautiful dark green jumpsuit to go with the dark green shirt he'd worn inside of his white suit. He held out my seat for me when it was time to sit at our table, and he'd kept the flow of the conversation balanced as we talked about anything and everything, but not about our final plan for the night, to ease the tension, to avoid putting any pressure on either of us. My mind had already been made up. I had come with the intention of going along with everything, with the intention of finishing what I had started. It was mostly just to get it out of my system, to get it over with, and head back home to resume my boring life. But boy, was I in for a big old surprise when we went to the hotel he'd reserved a room for us. It was a very nicely furnished suite, too. We started off lightly, gently, soft caressing and light touches that left a trail of heat on the exposed parts of my body that my jumpsuit didn't cover on my arms, back, and waist. Before I knew it, we had stumbled onto the bed and clothes began to fly. Jacket here, shoes there, zipper teeth unlocking and jewelry gently pried off bodies, and we were tumbling in the sheets. Did I mention that Anthony was quite versed in the ways of pleasure? Whether by skill built from experience of just natural, innate talent, I had no idea, and I didn't even care to know. But he strummed me like a string instrument placed in the hands of a veteran artiste. Arousal burned in the pit of my stomach, and he was a soothing, cooling balm that took the heat away and replaced it with warm pleasure and relief. I liked it. I loved it. I loved how he made me feel with each passing moment, and I definitely loved how our bodies had fit together like puzzle pieces under the covers, and my mind flashed back to my husband, who I had left at home nonetheless. We left the hotel early the next day, at 6 a.m. in the morning or so, and I went home to a worried, panicked husband who gave me a puzzled look that made me fight the urge to squirm where I stood, an urge which I successfully suppressed and met his eyes before I gave him an answer. A little bit of an explanation, actually. I told him that I just wanted to spend a night out and to have a change of scenery since we were not on the best of terms. I had answered nonchalantly, shrugging like I had not embraced another man the night before, like my nether regions didn't ache from the sheer size and skill of Anthony and his solid body. powerful thrusts that rocked my body along with the bed. Those thoughts had me shiver for an entirely new reason, a reason that my husband sort of knew, understood, and he had raised a brow at me. I said it was nothing and I just missed him. I also told him not to think much of him. My husband just chuckled at me and told me that he had run a bath for me the second my car parked outside our property. I had let out a sigh of relief at the turn of events, and I went upstairs to find the tub filled with hot water that did wonders for my muscles and other sore spots. My husband later came in to check on me before promising me takeout for lunch since it was a Saturday, and we both had nowhere else to be till Monday morning. I had graciously accepted, and we had gotten takeout after my shower. David and I, seated in the living room with me wrapped only in a robe, no underwear, and we ended up going at it on the couch there. I was on top of him, something he enjoyed whenever I did it for him, and I rolled my hips expertly, grinding down on him and changing the pace of my rocking when I went too close to the edge. Making love to my husband after I had been held by another man sounded like such a turnoff, but it had a certain thrill that stemmed from the level of sensitivity I achieved, and it drove me wild, even as we worked in tandem to bring pleasure to each other. Afterwards, we finished our cold lunch and just laid down on the couch, cuddled and shared small kisses here and there as we watched a movie. The days had gone back to normal as mine and David's life could go back to when we got up from the couch. We went about our days after the weekend, relating like friends again, friends who occasionally made love and kissed each other goodbye for work every weekday morning. And I sort of continued to meet up with Anthony on some weekends and weekdays too. So I started to get more and more scarce in the house, and it sparked something in David. Something that sounded a lot like suspicion, and the game began without my knowledge. I should have known that something was wrong. Something had gone terribly wrong, but I just could not quite place my finger on it. Maybe it was because I was numb from my activities the day before, or maybe it had just been my paranoia working to fill my head with the most negative things, but I should have been more careful. No, maybe it was my activities over the months too, and not just one night. My first tell should have been the car that had been trailing me for almost a month. I had ignored this, and stubbornly told myself that no one had the right to think badly of me when my husband came home with hickeys and scratch marks on most days lately, while I tried my best to ensure that there were no marks left on my body. The car would follow me around all day, from my neighborhood, watching me as I went to work, and would drive after me almost inconspicuously as I left work for home, and then any other outing I was interested in for that day, and this would repeat the very next day. I had not even been aware of this until Anthony had mentioned somewhat nonchalantly, teasing me saying, "If I didn't know any better, I'd think your husband was following you around." He laughed softly and I raised a brow at this, but he just laughed some more till I was glaring at him and he snorted at me. He asked if I couldn't see the vehicle that was parked a little away from the restaurant we were having a date at. I turned slightly, looking for the car with the corner of my eye. A shiny matte black Mercedes was truly parked a little ways from the restaurant, and the driver was pointedly looking away from the restaurant, but his side view mirror offered a view of the outdoor restaurant, whereas I was seated to be precisely. It wasn't David. The silhouette didn't match. I had asked myself why I had thought the man would be my husband. I was keeping an eye on the car as I moved my body to face Anthony once again, and Anthony raised a brow before resuming his laughter. Anthony said he parked there barely a few minutes after I arrived, and with the way he had parked, he probably had a nice view of our table from his side view mirror. He saw that I was panicking and he told me to relax. I sort of relaxed a bit and enjoyed our date. We ended our outing in a boutique where Anthony picked a dress or two and a nice pair of heels and a new purse for me while I picked up things for my husband, namely a watch and a nice pair of shoes to go with the silver accessory. Anthony hailed a taxi for me and kissed me goodbye while I slipped into the back seat, but I told the taxi driver to take the U-turn that would take me away from my neighborhood, as I had told him I wanted to go the long way home. Of course, the man raised a brow at this, but I just shrugged and gave a tired smile, or what I hoped looked like a tired smile and not a weird grimace. I kept my eyes half open and stared at the side view mirror of the taxi, and sure enough, the sleek black Mercedes was there, obviously following me since it had taken any turn that we had taken, and it had been driving in any lane the taxi I sat in had driven in. This cemented my thoughts, confirmed my suspicion of being watched, monitored even. I had been furious, had thought to myself that David had no right to be so suspicious, especially when I had found out that he had found a partner outside of the marriage, and while he didn't meet with them as often as I met with Anthony, they were still very much present and I had never thought of. watching or spying on them even once, so what had given him the bright idea that he had just about any right to put a tail on me? To watch and monitor me? I had been furious, to say the least, and I was just about ready for an argument, a fight, and that was just what I had done. I had brought up the fact that he had been following me around like a paranoid child, and I was fuming, but David was calm, gently telling me to cool my temper and go take a shower. He had told me gently to relax. He said I was just working up due to the stress from work, leading me upstairs towards the bathroom, and I found myself relaxing, and I just decided to be chill about it. About as chill as an angry woman could be in a situation, though not quite like mine, but close enough. Things had gone from wrong to straight up disastrous as the days had gone back. My husband had started to give me a disturbing, knowing look and smirk that had made me queasy and jumpy. Like he knew something, and he had me dancing in the palm of his hand, and I did not like it one bit. That feeling like I was some kind of plaything that he was having a blast manipulating and bending to his whims as he pleased. Like an unwilling player of some sick, twisted game, and then the next tells. It was like we had gone from affectionate roommates to now trying one up the other in a mental tug of war that grated on my nerves and sanity with each passing day. The fleeting touches, the knowing smiles, and the sexual innuendos, like he had been trying to do more than get my attention. Like he wanted to say something, but he was waiting for me to say something, and it confused me beyond normal, beyond what I was used to. David was quite the thorough man and a very critical thinker, one of the quirks that caught my eye in the first place, and this new game had made my visits to Anthony get shorter, and my nights in bed with David longer and more frequent. Like he was trying to get something across, like he was hinting at something that suspiciously reminded me of how long and hard Anthony usually went in bed, all while maintaining gentility. On weekdays, it would just be a quick tumble in the sheets, and on a weekend, it would be lovemaking till almost the crack of dawn with gentle caressing and sweet gestures in bed. "Don't you think the game is going on too long? Can we just stop now?" David had murmured into my neck as we laid in bed one night after what would usually happen on a weekend. Hours of caressing and kissing, and I turned to look at him, but he'd already gone still. He said he was at his limit. He had huffed, and it sounded too hard, too angry to be something ordinary, and I began to fear my husband from that night. I could sense that he was changing, but not for good or for my good. We were okay for the next 2 months or so before tragedy struck. I went out to meet Anthony again, but I was distracted, and Anthony could tell that much. He was genuinely worried, and he had stated as such. The car had stopped following me around 2 weeks ago, and the feeling of an entity hovering over me, observing me, had finally calmed down, but I could not shake off the new feeling that made me shudder in fear. And my instincts were hardly ever wrong, but I pushed it down in favor of going back to the conversation with Anthony, so I would not come across as a paranoid lunatic to him. Anthony had suggested we take the edge off, and we ended up in a hotel. Now, I had always made sure I used protection whenever I was with Anthony, and not just on his part, but mine as well. And it wasn't for fear of him not being clean, but it was more because of a strange moral line I just couldn't bear to cross, because I had always felt that even though I wasn't faithful anymore, I wouldn't want to do something like that. And Anthony had been very understanding, going along with my whims and accepting my terms almost immediately, right from day one. It had been like always, starting out soft and sweet, but something wasn't quite right. I couldn't really get in the mood properly, and it was obvious to Anthony, who had stopped halfway through the act and came to sit beside me in bed, and I found myself making a face of worry and pain, like I'd been stabbed. I had to swallow the lump lodged in my throat as I sat up, pulling on the sheets to cover up, despite Anthony already seeing everything there was to see. Anthony asked me what was wrong. He sounded frantic despite the cool facade that he'd put up, and I turned to look at him, with a look I did not quite know how to place, and I suddenly told him that it did not feel right to me anymore. I told him I didn't know if I could keep doing this, and it would be unfair to him, but he didn't understand. My voice had cracked, and he looked worried, very worried, and I was suddenly feeling sick again. I had run to the ensuite and emptied my bowels of the meager meal I had to literally nibble on back at the restaurant earlier. Anthony had stood up from where he'd been sitting and ran towards me, had rubbed my back gently as I threw up and continued to dry heave there. My stomach was cramping and my hips felt like they were being crushed as my pelvis sort of felt like it had started to fold up, like menstrual cramps, but it felt much worse than that. I told him I was not feeling well and I wanted to take my leave. I had excused myself and slid into my car and zoomed off in the direction of the nearest hospital, while my eyes burned with tears and my heart hurt as I recalled the look of shock on Anthony's face. I ignored all the texts and calls that were coming through. I wouldn't be able to say anything. Now back to my initial worry. My first question should have been how quiet the house had been as I got back from my outing that Saturday evening. Or was it an afternoon? I cannot remember it that well anymore. But anyway, the silence unnerved me. It irritated me for some reason, but I struggled successfully to push it down, as I didn't want to spoil the good news I had come with for my husband. The front door was locked, and I couldn't be bothered to begin to rummage through my handbag for my keychain that I had stupidly put inside the bag, so I just opted to knock. I also didn't want to call my husband either. I waited briefly and sighed in relief at the sounds of footsteps coming down the stairs from the bedroom. But it didn't sound right. The footsteps were gentle, more gentle, lighter even as they approached the door, and the silhouette was all wrong. Shorter and lighter. Then the door swung open and I was greeted by a smiling, very much attractive woman in lingerie and an almost sheer transparent robe. She was young, looked like she was younger than me, if her features were accurate giveaways of her age, and I raised a brow, my hackles raised, but she only kept smiling as she leaned against the doorframe and observed me, not condescendingly or with any other expression other than curiosity and a gentle tell of arousal. In essence, just for observation's sake, while I squirmed internally. She said hello, and she also said my name. Her voice was deceptively sweet. Her tone was too gentle, too knowing as she addressed, greeted me. I asked dumbly if she knew me as I blinked rapidly at the woman whose smirk broke, and she chuckled gently, sweetly at my question. She said she did. Not only that, but she also said that my husband was waiting for me upstairs. The woman smiled, if possible, wider, and I nearly gave myself internal mental whiplash with how fast my brain snapped back to the reason why I felt so irritated by the otherwise mouth-watering young woman before me, and I have to stop myself from growling or shrieking as my attention snapped back to the woman who merely ushered me in like she owned the place. Her hand teasingly ran up my arm as I started to enter the house. I shuddered and looked back at her, and she merely bit her lips seductively, but I decided to focus more on where I was going, on who I was looking for. There were clothes scattered all over the living room and the way to the stairs, indicating that the little tumble had in fact begun all the way from the living room. I called out David's name as I shouldered past the woman and bounded up the stairs and headed straight to our bedroom. I opened the door sharply and had to suck in a breath at the sight on the bed. It honestly terrified me, but what scared me most of all was the sight of the manic grin on my husband's face as he lay spread-eagled on the queen-sized bed, cuffed and chained to the headboard, wearing absolutely nothing on his person, just like he had come into the world. The sound of footsteps behind me made me remember that there was someone else in the house with us. But I paid no mind as the woman who had introduced herself as Fanny sauntered past me and slinked up to the bed, caressed my husband's face before promptly slapping him, hard. And to my horror, my husband David let out a soft moan at the act. His body flushed over some more, and I had to swallow down the bile that had worked its way up my throat. I stood there, shell-shocked and unseeing, and I replayed what I had seen over and again inside my head. I was so distracted by my thoughts and panic that I didn't realize that Fanny had left the bed and was walking over to where I stood. Fanny told me to enjoy the show. She had purred in my ear with a husky voice that sent shivers running down my spine, and I flinched violently, pushing her away from me, and promptly began to hyperventilate. I thought I was dying, but I wasn't. I was just terrified at how much of a reaction I had to the woman's voice and words. Fanny wasn't a monster per se, and it was evident in the fact that she started to rub my back and guided me to take deep breaths to calm myself and stop gasping for breath. It took about 3 minutes or so before I suddenly caught myself and took a deep breath one more time and scrambled to leave, like I had remembered where I was standing, where I was. But Fanny held my arm in a death grip, and I was still in absolutely no condition to muster up strength, so I couldn't leave. Nah. Fanny told me not to leave, but this time she had a handkerchief, pulled out from God knows where, and she pressed it to my face hard. She squeezed my neck so I would inhale, and I did. Felt my eyes roll back and everything went black. I woke up a while later to the sound of creaking wood, a familiar sound, and I opened my groggy eyes to the sight of my husband gagged and being whipped with some weird whip that was made of leather, and the sounds he was making weren't ones of pain but rather of pleasure. Pure, unadulterated pleasure, and it burned my throat like the rising bile that threatened to spill from my lips. I was tied to one of the chairs from our study by the side of the bed, and a cloth tucked behind my teeth to keep me from screaming, which I would have done as I watched the scene before me unfold on my bed. Fanny finished hitting my husband and took out the gag so she could kiss him deeply while she undressed, and his eyes fell on me when they broke apart from the kiss. I could never forget the amount of poison that laced his voice when he said he didn't forget I was there. I felt tears welling up in my eyes as I struggled with my bonds, twisting my arms and legs in the rope, and I got frictional burns, but I did not want to stop struggling, to stop fighting. I watched as the woman climbed over my husband and sank down on his length almost immediately, like some kind of professional, then began to grind on my husband, gyrating her hips, undulating as she pleased him expertly on our matrimonial bed, as she served him in my place, my position. David began talking in between his groans, and Fanny was giggling between moans. He told me he knew about my affair. He said he was waiting for me to stop or just tell him what was wrong, but I didn't. Tears streamed down my face as I watched Fanny do things with her hips that I knew I was not capable of, rotations and rolls that boasted of a certain level of flexibility. He continued to speak, telling me how much he wanted me to suffer, and how much better he thinks Fanny is because his revenge tasted a little too sweet, and that the horror on my face made it worth it. She choked him, and he loved it, all of it. I didn't know when I actually threw up, but I know I tasted bile, and as I looked down at myself, I saw it all over my clothes, and I think I passed out again at the sight and sound of my husband and Fanny reaching their peaks and letting out twin moans of ecstasy. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a robe and on fresh sheets as Fanny ran her fingers through my hair as my head was on her lap. My husband laid beside me, curled into my side, bruised up and covered in sweltering red marks and scratches, but in his pajama bottoms, and he looked so relaxed, content. Fanny asked if I slept well, and I went rigid, but she just laughed softly and changed the question. She asked me again if I enjoyed the show, and I whimpered like a child. I was crying again, and she shushed me, telling me not to wake David. She said I'd be allowed to sleep some more, as much as I wanted, till David woke up, and then he and I would talk about what would come next, which I knew, but all I did was nod and close my eyes again, sinking into that dark place full of gentle static that was actually my own mind, with drying tear tracks on my cheeks. It wasn't until the next day that David called me down to the living room to talk, but Fanny had left to her own place. David told me that he'd already prepared divorce papers if I didn't want to be a part of the relationship with Fanny, and he had a smug look on his face while I tried to hide my disgust. He called me a hypocrite, saying that at least his own affair was in my presence and he wanted to include me in the triangle, so I shut my mouth and listened as he continued to talk. I agreed to sign the divorce papers and not to go to court for anything. He looked pleased with himself, and I shuddered in disgust and, frankly, fear. I told him that I would leave that day, but he said not to until I was sure I'd found a new place. He told me he was not a monster, with a small smile, before leaving with the divorce papers to no doubt call his lawyer. I ended up being tied up in the master bedroom once again, watched my husband getting sort of assaulted and degraded almost every night, and I passed out each time. I sped up my moving process because it was necessary, since I just keep getting hogtied and made to watch them make love every night at my displeasure. I would never forget how my husband howled with laughter as I booked it out of the house as fast as I could. His arms were wrapped around Fanny as I watched through the rearview mirror of the car. I cried silently. Is it weird that I couldn't help but feel like I had pushed my husband to the extreme, and it had led to him sinking so low? Update. To this day, I still vividly remember, with no small horror, how my husband was writhing in his bonds, underneath that woman who looked to be younger than I was, and he was groaning and shuddering with ecstasy. 2 years have passed since then, and I have a beautiful daughter, and she's actually David's, contrary to what you might think with my little fling or affair of sorts. I know it's not the other man's, since I had actually ended it all as soon as I found out I had conceived, but I had to be made to watch a show I'd rather not view in real life, and I can't help but want to claw my eyes out whenever I remember it. What makes it even worse is that I was standing in the parking lot of one of the 2 hospitals in town, staring blankly at the wedding invitation in my shaking hands. David weds Fanny, and Fanny had the guts to giggle excitedly as she handed me the invitation, and I felt tears roll down my face as the date of the wedding sinks in. The day of the ceremony is the day of the anniversary of mine and David's divorce. I can't tell David I have a child for him, especially not now that he's getting married, because I'd like keep even a little bit of shame, and also because I don't want to be anywhere near him anymore, because I'm afraid of him and Fanny and what they could do to me, what else they would do to me. I didn't contact Anthony throughout, and I made sure not to mistakenly come across him. By that I mean I moved to another town and changed my numbers because I can't bear any more pain, and I don't want to explain anything to him. Every day I hope I don't come across Anthony because I won't know how to explain anything. He might even read this story I'm writing. All I know is that this was my fault.